Hello and welcome to the Michael Harding podcast. I used to say the Michael Harding podcast because I was afraid of saying my name. I wasn't used to this, and now I'm flying at it. A year after I began doing the podcast, here I am, and I'm going to give you a wee story, something that happened in 2012. I wrote about this in the Irish Times. I was sitting in the sun with a neighbour woman during the hot weather, and her husband emerged from the kitchen wearing a helmet and a leather biker's suit. "I'm going for a ride," he said, cool and understated. He's well over 6 foot tall, and in real life he's an airline pilot, so I suppose floating around Leitrim on a 1100cc bike is not that big an issue for him. He was gone 40 minutes when I heard the muffled sound of the exhaust in the distance, and then he floated back over the hill and up the gravel avenue, like a samurai warrior emerging from a movie screen. He said he had circled Loch Allen a few times. There was something utterly masculine about him in a mythic way, which I envied, as I nattered with his wife about how Galway is great crack during the summertime, and how well my cat is assimilating into Leitrim society. You see, I was just home from Mullingar after 5 years in exile, wandering around thinking I was in the middle of Europe, and then discovered I wasn't, and I wasn't well, and I got ill, and I came home to Leitrim. But when I was coming back from Mullingar, I took me cat with me. The lady wife in Leitrim had a cat, and then I had a cat, so hers was called Roxy, and mine was called Ronnie, and myself and the lady wife referred to them as your cat and my cat. She'd say, "Your cat left the head of a mouse on the carpet last night." And I'd say, "Your cat is so stupid it can't figure out how to get through the cat flap." And she'd say, "Your cat stinks of the tom." And I'd say, "Your cat has all worms." And on it went. It was a game, playing out our marital tensions in the surrogate narrative of feline adventures. I was even thinking of writing a book called Cat Play, Therapy for Disturbed Couples. A book to help couples with marital difficulties. Conflicts could be acted out through dialogues relating to the cats instead of using children as punch bags. I mentioned that one time to the medical walla. Now, the medical walla, I have to describe him. I used to write about him in the Irish Times at one stage. He was a gentleman. He used to be a chemist, and then he decided he didn't want to be a chemist. He wanted to be an artist. So he gave up the chemistry, and he grew his hair long, and he got silver rings for all his fingers, and he started smoking roll-up cigarettes and eventually marijuana. Eventually he ended up in Galway, and he was never heard of again. Occasionally I'd run into him, and he'd tell me that he was writing a novel or making a film, but they never seemed to get made. And I met him around that time in Galway, and we had lunch in a tapas bar near Wood Quay. He was looking well in the sunshine, long grey hair to his shoulders, and the 3 rings on various fingers. He was wearing a faded denim jacket too. He always looked cool, in an old man sort of way. And he had a saffron scarf around his neck that no doubt some young lady left behind in his apartment. "What are you doing in Galway?" says I to the medical walla. "Film fla," he said. "But that's not until next month," I said. "I know," he said, "but there's networking to be done, business." I said I didn't know you were interested in the movies. "By the way," he said, "did you ever hear that windmills can cause drafts? Did you ever notice that the windmills in Leitrim don't just move with wind? They create wind." I said, "That's impossible. They generate electricity from the wind. They're not generating the wind itself. That wouldn't be economical." "But how do you know?" he said. The fact is, they move even on days when there's no wind. And ask yourself, why is the government subsidizing them? I said, that's amazing. He said, there's more. Yes, more. He said, I was talking to a documentary maker the other night who's doing a film about it. Apparently, there's a possibility that the government intends storing gases in them, which will be released at night, and the windmills will act as fans to spread the gas across various layers of mountain bog. Why, I wondered. Pesticides, he said. It's all about preserving the bogs, like what the EU does with the lettuce. That's why the turf cutting has been banned. They're going to use windmills to spread chemical weed killer. So therefore, they have to get people off the bogs. If you're living close to those windmills in Leitrim, you won't know what's coming out of them at night. I tried to focus on the Spanish soup. It was full of little bits of everything and tasted spicy and delicious. The Walla was in a hurry, so I agreed to cover the bill, and he dashed off because he said he left the motorbike in the car park without a ticket. From the window I watched him mount the old battered Honda. There was a sticker on the back, Mudguard. Stop the propellers. He looked like a pull-through for a shotgun with his long, scraggy hair blowing in the wind as he drove away, and there was something masculine about him which I was glad I didn't share. That was in 2012. And when I look at all the fake news there is now, and we even have that name for it, like fake news, and when I look at the kind of luders that be going on about the vaccination and what they're putting into your body with the vaccination, and when I look at just all the kind of crazy stuff from Trump in America to Brexit and the whole wave of madness and what people are prepared to believe, I look back on that time 9, 10, 15 years ago when I knew my dear friend, and he was wonderful. And there was a great liberation in his life that he had sort of shaken off the constraints of a conventional life and moved from Dublin to Leitrim and just become this different person with long hair, and he was happy, you know, and he didn't make any movies, but as far as he was concerned, he dedicated his life to the arts and to making movies, so fair play to him. And that's what Leitrim is and was. When I came back to Leitrim, I found it to be an amazing place because there was a mixture of John McGahern's Leitrim, a mixture of old-fashioned Leitrim, but by God, there was a wave that came on around 2000 to 2010, and it was a real pluralist, modern, intelligent wave of new people who came to Leitrim, and I loved it and still love it, and that's why I love Leitrim. And I still get in trouble with people from Roscommon because I am actually living in Roscommon. I'm living in County Roscommon, it's in Arigna, and I know I always say Leitrim because Leitrim is all around me. We're the last townland in Roscommon. I look over the ditch in 3 directions and I'm looking into Leitrim, so I do tend to say Leitrim, and I go to Drumshambo and I go to Carrick-on-Shannon rather than towns in Roscommon. So I keep making the mistake of saying, Leitrim, 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 and everybody then feels like he should say he's from Roscommon. That he's living in Roscommon, technically. Fair enough. But I just want to talk about Leitrim because it's all around me, and my engagement was with Leitrim, and I thought that when I came back in 2012 it was a place that was full of excitement. And me, after being in Mullingar, thinking Mullingar was going to be the Prague of Europe, me thinking I was going to be like a a writer in a cosmopolitan world. I mean, it was grand. Mullingar is, if you like horses and four-wheel drive jeeps, you're grand. But there's something tranquil about Leitrim. There's something like everybody in the world who wants to create an alternative life is welcome in Leitrim. And that's why there's so many really, really good things in Leitrim to do with organic food, to do with, ideas in the arts, to do with sculpture like in Manor Hamilton, and, the dock in Carrigan-Shannon is a wonderful place. And there's a film industry in Leitrim. You don't have to go to Galway either. And I'll just share with you another little story about that, and it's from about the same time, 2012, when I was in the movies in Leitrim. I'll start like this. I was in a community hall in Leitrim one night with a film crew, and there was a boxing ring in the hall, and young boys were skipping away and sometimes gawking at the actors like they might not be real. Now, the film wasn't about the child boxers. It was merely coincidence that the boxing club and the film crew were using the same hall on the same night. The film crew didn't seem quite real to the children, and the children didn't seem real to me, since I too was there because I was in the film. In one scene, I had to smuggle diesel by driving a truck across the border. Of course, I only drove the truck 5 meters, and a real driver did the rest, wearing the same clothes as me. While the film crew set up cameras, me and the real driver waited in the cab of the truck and talked about the weather, about fracking, and the quality of chips in Dromahair. The next scene was in Dromahair, in the back room of a bar, where my character was involved in a fight. But in the real bar, where I waited for the shooting to commence, 2 old men sat at either ends of the counter, reading separate copies of the Leitrim Observer in silence. Then a 3rd man entered, old and scrawny in a shiny black suit, and sat beside me and said, "Is this where they're filming?" "They're in the back room," the barman whispered. "I should be in it," he declared. "I've had an interesting life." And pinning me to the high stool with a stare, he continued, "I often danced half the night and drank a bottle of whiskey and still made love so fiercely that they called me the Hammer." "Oh, indeed," he concluded. I turned every page in the book. "No one ever called me a hammer," I said. "And who are you?" he asked, with the authority of someone who never dug a crooked ridge in his life. "I live near Drumshambo," I said, trying to avoid discussing the film. "Well," he said, "my grandfather was from Drumshambo, and he emigrated to America with a brother, and the brother was flung from the upper deck of an open-top bus one day and split his head open. So my grandfather came home, and I was born here, and if that old granduncle hadn't died prematurely, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I might have grown up with an American, and I'd become a movie star." He seemed pleased with that phrase. "Anyway," he said, "what are you doing in Dromahair?" "I'm in the movie," I said. And just then I was called into the back room because it was time to act. There's an air of unreality about films. It gets to be so real that real life seems like an illusion. Even Dublin seemed unreal later that week when I attended the film festival. From the window of my hotel one night I remember witnessing a savage brawl on the street below between 2 youths. On the following morning I passed the spot and could smell disinfectant where the blood had been cleared up, but it didn't bother me in the slightest. Living in Leitrim seemed like a different place, a different universe, a calmer, more peaceful, coalescence of traditional rural life and modernity. Anyway, I had a pancake with maple syrup at a street cafe not far from Grogan's pub, where I once met the poet John Jordan in 1979. And John Jordan was a great poet and a critic, and looking back on him, I'd be thinking to myself, if only he had gone to Leitrim, he would have been maybe a happier man. I don't know if Jordan had any opinion about films. That was something you didn't talk about at the time. Films weren't seen as art in those days. Art was about writing books and writing poems, and then you went off and went to a movie, but that was just recreation. What we'd call now popular culture. But I remembered I did ask Jordan if he believed in God, because people told me he was a great Catholic, and we were still talking about God in those times, back in those days, in 1979. So I asked him, did he believe in God? And he said, I believe in affliction, twisting every sinew of his arthritic body around the words like ivy choking a tree. Affliction, he said, is the only reality. God Almighty was a very kind of medieval, tortured view of the world, and I suppose again, what's wonderful about Leitrim and Roscommon is that you can live a real life of modernity, especially with the internet. The facility of the internet wasn't imagined even in 2012, even when the medical walla had to head off to Galway if he wanted to be involved in the movies. No, you can do it now in Leitrim. You can do anything in Leitrim. Anyway, I had my pancake that time in Dublin, and I slipped into Grogan's just to see what it was like all those years later. And morning light slanted across the carpet, and a barman was boiling a kettle, and the place seemed weird without smoke, and empty without John Jordan. Outside Drury Street car park, there was a homeless man, and he was sitting with his blanket, and he had a woolly hat, and he had a plastic cup. And he smiled, and he blessed me, and I tried to avoid his eyes by assuming a kind of unfocused indignation. But he was having none of it. Please, he begged, stretching his arm towards me. Small change. His eyes caught mine, and I realized that he was beautiful, and that he looked very like Daniel Day-Lewis. And for all I knew, there might have been cameras round the corner, because the moment was very real indeed. But I stop myself with shock when I remember and read back on that little story, when I think of the surprise. You see, I'd be reflecting on how wonderful Leitrim is, and in a way I am a propagandist for rural life, because I think that modernity can be lived freely in rural Ireland. I think that all the wonderful freedoms and liberations of modern life can happen in rural Ireland, but I think that rural Ireland still has a structure and fabric of community that sustains a balanced life, so that people don't get pulled out and pulled away into distractions. And we all suffer. I mean, John Jordan was a great writer, but God Almighty, he suffered. If anybody out there remembers him, he suffered arthritis. He died young. He drank too much. And inside, I think, in his soul, there was so much that was unspoken and unexpressed, and he tortured himself in a spiritual way, And the poor guy on the street is another example of somebody who's beautiful and wonderful, and yet underneath the drug addiction or whatever the addiction is that leaves them homeless and damaged on the street, there is a real sense of a soul that's tortured. And the medical walla, I think he survives in rural Ireland, and guys like him survive in rural Ireland because they're trying to explore something, and you could be judgmental about it. Any man who, decides at 50 that he wants to be an artist and just change his life, there's a lot to commend it, It may seem like irresponsible, and there was a time where it would be really criticised and condemned, but there is honestly a great liberation in every woman and every man feeling that, I could walk out the door tomorrow if I really wanted to, if I felt my life was going on somewhere else. And I think that's a phrase, I used to use that phrase about my own life years ago when I was in the clergy and I was walking around, with a uniform on me, but my life was going on somewhere else. I knew in my soul, I knew on the inside that I was somewhere else. I think it's very important that that feeling that change your life, there's something radical that you'd love to do, Not that you need to do, like, compulsively, but something that would feel like love touching you, if you did something. And it's great to feel that at 60 or 50 or 70 or 40, you can do it. You can change your life. You can transform yourself. And in fact, this is interesting because transformation of life, I think, is one of the key hinges of a healthy spiritual, mental, physical life. The sense that you have the possibility of completely turning the world upside down for yourself in a beautiful way. I think that if you don't see it consciously, you do it unconsciously, and when you do it unconsciously, you actually transform it in a destructive way. Now, this is pure gobbledygook, folks. This is pure me talking intuitively about my own experiences, but with no scholarship, no background, no nothing. So, warning here. Don't take my opinions. I'm only sharing the story of my life. But I certainly do believe that there's this urge of transformation, right? We all have it. I mean, the beautiful big man going out on the motorbike is also looking for some kind of transformation. He's like one of the Native Americans, the plains communities in the Midlands of America 200-300 years ago, who used to go out on a horse, and they would ride the horse endlessly across the flat plain until they went into a trance. And in that trance they found transformation. And I think he's like that, and sometimes bikers are like that, and the bikers do come to Arigna, and they come to Carrick-on-Shannon every Saturday morning across from the riverfront near Cryans. You'll find in the bakery shop, lovely little shop for buns and coffee, and you'll find them there, 10 or 15 bikes, and they're all sitting around in their leathers, having their coffees. And there wouldn't be young lads, do you know what I'm saying? They'd have old grey beards on them. But this is a wonderful world if we can experience our freedom, and the ultimate freedom is the sense of complete transformation, even transformation that's illogical. That you never get caught into the fact that you die. I know this is crazy, but I mean, Carl Jung said this, an old person should live as if they had 300 years left. This is a beautiful way to live. Transformation is where you completely upend everything. And there's something in us, our hearts are restless until they rest in God, used to say, but they're restless for transformation. And it's like there's transformation from the whole life, but there's transformation in every single day. If you have a day that's boring, there's an urge in you to kind of do something that changes it, that kind of completely changes it. And it could be as small a thing as going for a walk that you never went for before, or looking at a bird in the garden and giving yourself 5 minutes of meditation and mindfulness, or it could be just anything that transforms your life. And there's creative ways to do that, and if you don't find creative ways to do that, the danger is that you'll fall into an unconscious, compulsive transformation. A transformation that hurts other people and hurts yourself, or feeds an addiction or whatever, you know. No matter how much whiskey I drink, it's not a good transformation, even though unconsciously I'm looking for transformation when I'm drinking it. I'm trying to get the plane off the runway to get to some other universe. And then I wake up in the morning and I realise the plane never really quite got off the runway. That's how I used to feel now when I was in my 30s. And I don't drink whiskey now. My life has been, thanks be to God, a gradual and slow decline in the quantity of alcohol that I put into the system on a daily basis. And now it's kind of, I'd say, normal. You know, I'd maybe 3 nights a week I'd drink up to a half bottle of whiskey, a half bottle of wine, sorry. Oh God. Up to 3 nights a week, and there'd be 4 nights of the week that I wouldn't be taking alcohol at all. I think I have it down to moderate drinking at this stage, and I'm very grateful for that. But what I'm saying is that we all need transformation, and we all desire this thing of totally transforming the life. And when you don't do it, I think John Jordan suffered because of the lack of transformation in his life. I think that the boy in the street, or the man in the street that I met, you know, broken by the addiction to heroin, is saying to me, I wanted transformation, I needed transformation, I did it unconsciously, and now this is where I am. And I think the medical walla found transformation beautifully in the country. And he's not laughed at, he's admired and appreciated. And I think that the man who goes into the trance, you know, up and down the country in a motorbike. And some people do it in a camper van. There's different ways to find transformation. And you can have it on a, you know, you can measure a life and see 1 or 2 transformations in it. In youth, in middle age, in older age. Moments of transformation, they're very beautiful. So, in Leitrim, I think that people are sustained in ways that a full life is possible. And I love Leitrim. The only place I love more than Leitrim is Arigna, and that's in County Roscommon. So, I hope you've enjoyed that. I'm going to do the next podcast, which will be very much about transformation at another level, because that's where I suppose I see the value in my own life of faith experience. Faith is not something that I take or grasp like the truth, you know, some kind of truth. I'm always saying that I think you need religion to escape religion. If you're living with an ideology or a religion that kind of squeezes you in and tells you this is the true or the right or the moral way to live and you have to live like this, that's it. Well, there's no escaping that. There's going to be no transformation in that. The strange thing is that religion, I find, for me, better than ideology or philosophical ways of living, to have a kind of religious disposition allows me to transform, to actually subvert everything. Because religion is always about the thing beyond the way you say the thing. It's always about the impossibility of being, as in itself transformative. And so it's really important for me to say, I don't propagate religion, and I'm only searching for this in my own life. It's not that I believe in religion in a traditional, conventional way. And yet, I find that religion, faith, experience, and ritual benefit me and help me to have a way of transformation on the inside in every moment. In every moment I try to find transformation. I'm going to talk about that in the next podcast for this weekend. I look forward to doing that, and I hope you have a lovely weekend, because again, this is just midsummer and St. John's Eve and St. John's Feast, and it's just a really special time. It mirrors Christmas and the solstice of winter. In the darkness, beautiful time, and here we are in this auspicious period of 7 or 8 days where the earth is going through its great transformation. I'll go now. Hope you have a lovely weekend, and thank you for being here. And bye-bye.